Okay, everybody, welcome to the newest episode of the Beer and Skittles podcast. Today we're talking everything stand-up comedy. This year so far has been huge for stand-up. You've had veterans putting out their specials like Tom Segura, but you've already started to see the new faces, like the next to come, putting out their first specials. Guys like Shane Gillis, Matt Rife, Trevor Wallace, Ralph Barbosa, Mark Norman, all these guys that some people know and are now more known like for having your first special because of like the age of the internet. The age
Did
of
Michael put
podcasts.
one out this year? Or has he already had a special? Michael Blaustein from...
No, he actually just filmed his special. He filmed his special back in October, I believe. So he hasn't even announced who it's releasing
When it's
with,
coming.
but he has one coming out.
Okay.
He's another one up and coming, going to be coming out either the end of this year or the beginning of next year. But you're almost kind of seeing like the changing of the guard happening. Obviously all these guys are like kind of coming in, and there's all the old guys still going. Tom, Burt came out with a special this year as well,
Yep.
Razzle Dazzle. I think he has another one coming out
Plus,
soon.
he had his movie come out this
He
year,
also
too.
had The Machine come out. So like stand-up comedy is probably bigger than it's ever been. This is the resurgence of it since like the 90s.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, because you had Kevin Hart, early 2000s, like, comedy was
was
stand
big,
up.
yeah. When the switch from Cat to Kevin,
Yep.
that's really when you're having a lot of guys running through. And now, with podcasts, the age of the internet,
And I think that's what makes it different is, like, seeing, like, Trevor and Michael coming out with a special now. And it's like, or
Well,
Trevor's special is out.
it gives you the leg up. It's not like back in the day, like these guys are already known.
Well, that's what I
Before,
mean. It's like, it feels weird. It's like, what do you mean they don't have a special? I've been
Yeah.
seeing clips of them for the last couple
they're
of
already
years.
so
It's
famous
because of
but they don't have a
podcasting. And,
special.
yeah, exactly.
It's because it's nuts. Because back in the day, the only place you're getting specials is Comedy Central, and then you might get one on BET, you might get one through HBO, Showtime, but like they're not getting seen as much. So
Right.
it's really just Comedy Central, and you're only seeing them when Comedy Central wants to air them.
Right.
So it's all limited. And before then, unless you saw somebody live, you don't have access to them. There's no internet.
Well, and even HBO, Showtime, they're not even picking up.
into the
Into
gaming
the game.
special. So they're trying to break into that. But Netflix is the best thing that's happened for comedy, in a very long time because Comedy Central dropped the ball. They were damn near dead in the water. Like there's a dark age for comedy in the 2010s.
But I think that's also not their fault in the fact that cable has died. Like
Yeah.
cable's just gone away, and it's like, well, that was their bread and
Cable was
butter.
dying, but they weren't making moves. They
Yeah.
weren't picking up new specials. They're just doing reruns the entire time. Comedy Central still exists.
Well, they also
but it's
moved
just-
into the, like, I remember watching all of the roasts on Comedy Central. They kind of moved into that, and then roast kind of died down. Like they died off.
Yeah, when you think about the roast code, they were fun and they were funny, but there's only so much of them that you can see. It's because it's a lot of the same people reappearing. You're hearing a lot of the same
Well,
jokes about them.
I think it's the same. Like they became big. Like, oh yeah, it's the Snoop Dogg roast, it's the Justin Bieber roast. Whereas if you go back to like when Don Rickles was doing it,
Hmm.
it was a panel of people and they all just kind of roasted each other. It wasn't like it was like, oh, this is the
That's
special. It was episodic and not, oh, this is a special. And I don't know. I'd be interested in seeing even a bunch of the podcast people,
Well, they
do
still-
like a roast thing, like a panel of them.
They still do roasts and whatnot, but they're just not big. Like I know earlier this year, I believe it was Trevor and Whitney Cummings hosted the roast of Burt Kreischer,
Mhm.
but it was I don't know if it was an OnlyFans release because OnlyFans TV is like a bigger thing that's like trying to break into the comedy world. I don't think OnlyFans it was a web episode. Like it wasn't anything huge. Like it wasn't through a big streamer, but like they had like guys like Darnell and like a bunch of older comics there doing the roast of Burt. Trevor and Whitney Cummings were there, so like they still do roast. They're just not big anymore. Like I
Yeah.
think even last year there was like the Netflix tried doing like, or maybe 2 years ago at this point, did the roast of the Jonas Brothers. That
Oh yeah,
was-
that's right.
it was kind of whack. But I think they had a lot of help through like SNL guys because like Pete and Keenan were
Yeah.
on that as well. But like that's another thing that's really like died in the industry is SNL. Like that was
And I think the biggest issue with SNL is they're keeping the cast for too long and they're not getting rid of them, which is weird because that's something that Lorne Michaels was never afraid of doing. Is yeah, we're gonna kill off the cast. Like, you look at when Adam Sandler, Chris Farley, Chris Rock, David Spade, Rob Schneider, biggest fucking cast you could think of. They were all hilarious. They all worked off each other, and then they all jumped into a polar bear pen, I think, at the zoo, and they all got killed off in a skit. And then that was the last we saw of them. And like they all then had very successful careers after that. But like, yeah, we just get rid of them, and we'll get a whole new cast.
Because it gets stale. Everything
Right.
everything eventually gets stale in what you're doing, and like Pete and Keenan have been there for
a very,
like a
very long
decade.
time,
It feels
yeah.
like at this point, and like, I mean, those are really the only two stars that it feels like they made recently. I mean, Colin and Jay are like pretty good, and they're like well known, but it's only because of the one skit. Like they're not.
They
like,
do the
known
news.
outside of that.
Yeah.
And Keenan was famous before SNL.
Correct.
I mean, he was a child actor, and it's a little different. But
And he's
he-
done comedy his whole career.
his name is just not that. His name was it, and then Pete, yeah, he kind of got famous through SNL, but now most of his stuff is movies.
I think one of the other things, like, if you look at old SNL actors and the characters they played, there's a lot of reoccurring characters. And SNL actually would produce these movies. And then that's how like it also pushed these actors into stardom and also made more money because you'd get Wayne's World. Wayne's World was originally just an SNL skit.
Yeah, that's true.
And then it turned into a movie franchise. It got multiple movies. Superstar. Will Ferrell's in it, and Sarah Silverman, I believe. That was an SNL skit. There was some. I mean, look at Adam Sandler. All of his stuff is like you can tell where he came from. Like his,
yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean. His skit work
on
into
SNL is the same as Adam Sandler in his early movies.
yeah, Waterboy.
Like Waterboy is nothing but a long SNL
Yeah.
skit at the end of the day.
But it is interesting that like it's no longer that. There's not that throughway of like, oh yeah, I'm on SNL and then I'm gonna start playing these characters and I'll become a comedic actor.
Well, I think it's a two-way street to where comedians think differently, and SNL isn't rotating them through either.
Yeah.
So like since there's the internet, there's podcasting, you know, TikTok is huge for comedy right now.
Mhm.
Like all those things, there's different avenues for comedians to work.
Yeah.
Before you only went in through SNL. Either you had to go up into and through SNL, or you had to just get discovered, which was even harder. To just hope that somebody was out there, like a promoter that had influence to watch you.
Yep.
I mean, so
The only other thing too was instead of SNL, if you were doing the stand-up route right away, and you were doing stand-up, your hope was to get a sitcom. You know, like George Lopez did stand-up. Eventually, he got a sitcom.
yeah, stand up.
Aptly named after, and that's the funny thing too is that like the comedians that got sitcoms, they were just playing themselves
Yeah.
too.
Well, so you think, I mean, like, so stand up was originally seen as a means to an end. Eddie Murphy did stand up to do movies.
Yeah.
Like George Lopez did stand up to do movies and shows. Seinfeld did stand up to get a show.
That's what I mean.
Bob Saget did stand up to get a show. Like all these guys that were like, you don't even think of them as stand up
Stand-up
comedians
comedians
because they got so big off of their shows. So to them, stand up was a means to an end. Now, the guys in the industry are like, I don't really want, like,
To do
yeah, I don't want to do TV. Like, I kind of love doing stand up. This is what I want to do. And now that they have platforms, they're like, I can just tour stand up the rest of my life. Like, there's no reason for me to do anything else.
But
So,
it's
like,
also a wild. I think it gets tiring too for comedians. Of touring is a lot of work, you know, and that's the same as musicians. You know, touring is a lot. It
Oh,
takes
yeah.
a lot out of you.
especially with that line of work. I mean, when you get so big that you're doing a special, you're building your special out for like a couple of months. Once you have those, then you're touring that, you're working clubs, you're fine tuning it, then you're touring it for like a year straight, constantly fixing the material. And so you do your special, you
Film it
film,
the special,
and then you scrap it all, and you start from scratch, and you have to keep like turning over, or you get.
it's funny
caught.
because comedians are like this middle ground between actors and musicians in the
Yeah.
sense of you scrap it all, but you're working, and it's that weird like this middle ground because
Yeah.
you're also live performing it. And then when you do your special, you're filming and all that. But
Yeah, they're the only ones that, when you think about it, they're the only industry that once you do it, it's done. You can never do it again.
yeah,
What a musician, when you make a hit, you tour that hit for the rest of your life.
mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, you're not running those jokes again.
No, you can never run those jokes again.
Yeah.
As soon as the hour airs,
Well, it's like
the joke is done.
it's like doing a show or a movie. Like if you're doing a series, like it's got to be different every movie. You're not just rehashing the same lines. You're not doing a Goodfellas Part 2 and starting it. My whole life I always wanted to be a gangster. Like no, that line, you need a new line. You need new dialogue. And it's just Joey Diaz talked about it before. He's like the world of comedy. It's crazy. Traveling and touring, going to all these cities, the people you meet and everything. But then it also reminds me of this. You ever seen the clip of Michael Jackson talking? He's doing an interview, and he's like, I hate touring so much. And they're like, Michael, they're trying to get a commercial, and he goes, but I hate it so much. And they're like, well, he goes, all right, fine, I'll say I love it, but you know the truth. And then all right. I love touring. I love it. It sounds so fake, and they all start laughing. He goes, why y'all laughing? I'm trying to be serious. And I think that's, but there's a reality there of it's exhausting, the amount of work that goes in when you're putting on, especially if you're doing what's even different of touring. You can tour and do small clubs, but if you're a comedian like Bert or Tom Segura right now, who are doing stadium, you know what I mean?
That's crazy. Is you think of I think Tom and Bert are prime examples of comedians. It's so weird because you think of them as they're probably growing up, guys that were slackers, guys that didn't want to work, guys that didn't want to do things because that's the funny guys. But they get into the industry and they work their fucking ass off.
There's so much work, yeah.
Tom has, I think, he has a Spanish podcast. He has a Your Mom's House podcast. He has Two Bears podcast. And then Bert has his own solo podcast. He has a cooking show. And then he has the Two Bears podcast.
And that's not
they
including...
both tour stadiums. Bert also does, he just did a cruise. He just did a full send tour with all of...
It doesn't include when they're then also guest stars on, Bad Friends, or if they're on, any of these other podcasts like Stiff Socks or something, where they're then talking to these other people. It's where do you have the time? Where's the time coming from? And it's but that's what they're doing full time. They're not working another job.
And comedians are the only people that I know that they're touring and then still doing other stuff and still creating more content, and then still also so you're building out your hour while touring because as soon as that hour's out, you're hot. You're your agent, your manager, they want you to start going. You sit there I just burnt all my material. I don't want to test material on a crowd that I they're coming to see me do me. I don't have material right now, and it's a struggle for comedians that you have to just perform and you have to start building your hour that fast. And especially when you're big, now you're touring a theater trying to build out an hour. You can't do that because you have to start all your material in a club because that's when you know what works. When you're in a theater, they're not built for live comedy all the time.
No, and
it's different.
I used to, when I lived in LA, I would go to the Laugh Factory all the time. It's free to get in. You just get the tickets online, and it's a 2-drink minimum. And the way to cheat that system is you can buy soda. You can get a Coke and spend no money. And you go in and you watch lineup of comedians. And sometimes there's special guests. There was one time I went in there, and nobody knew he wasn't on the ticket for that night, but Bill Burr was in town. And he came out and he did a set.
Well, when you're at the Laugh Factory, and especially even more at the Hollywood Improv, from what I hear, those are two places that's where all those LA comedians are working their material.
Well, no, and that's what it is. And even there's other nights where people are coming out and testing material. And if you go every week and stuff, you'll see the same people there.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll hear them say the same joke because, the audience is different this week, so I need to know who's laughing. And you're watching the audience to see, okay, did they laugh? Okay, the young people in the back, they laughed at that joke. So that's my target audience for that one. But then it's this joke fell flat this week. Why did it fall flat? Is it just not funny? Or You know what I mean? Like,
and it's a good environment to do so. There's millions of stories where like Chappelle and Bill Burr and a lot of your older comedians like that are just established they can do this. They'll go into like the Improv or the Laugh Factory, and they'll go there. They'll go on stage with a notebook, and they'll just talk to the crowd and just work the crowd, and then you just see them take the notebook out. They write. They might be like, oh, I have this one, and like they literally are just telling the crowd like, hey, I'm just trying to work on a set. Can you guys just like help me? And it actually happens. So like that's also a cool thing to see.
When I saw Bill Burr, and it's funny because Bill Burr he's always been like this, where he's from Mass, you know? His style of comedy isn't for everybody. You know, and it's funny because comedy is a hard one to recommend to people. If they're like, well, just recommend something. Yeah, if you don't know them and you don't know what like they like to laugh at or what they think is funny, it's very hard to recommend because everybody's different. So Bill Burr came out, and I already love him. But he comes out and he starts doing his set. I'm in the back, and the crowd in the front where the lights are just not responding to him. This one lady's on his phone, so he starts getting at her. You got fucking somewhere better to be, whatever. But like her friends that she's with didn't find that funny either. That crowd was just not for him. I was cracking up in the back though, laughing as hard as I could because it was so fucking funny.
You're doing the Boston material in an LA crowd.
It's not working.
That's not gonna work.
But Bill Burr, and he's been this way since the beginning of his career, he's not going to come off stage. He doesn't care. He's going to finish his set. Yeah, he's going to keep going.
You have to. You can't. Especially when it comes to, I mean, crowd work is so big now. Like, when you have hecklers, like, people heckle now more than ever at a comedy club.
I think they do it intentionally because they want to be on the clips.
They want the clickbait. Like, they want to be in the clip. So, and, like, now that and people that are, so if you weren't a comedy fan beforehand, you don't know, you're not supposed to heckle the comedian. No comedian likes a heckler. Like, yeah, they put out the clips because they do good with it.
There are so many comedians, I watched their clips today, and they're like, nah, do I come? Like, I'm working. I'm up here working. Nobody wants to hear you. They paid to come see me. But, like, what do you, sit down.
Now you're seeing all the crowd work clips. If you haven't been to a comedy club or you weren't a fan of comedy and now you're getting into it, you just think that's how it works.
Yeah, no,
so
absolutely.
Like, it's a huge misconception now that people are going there being like, oh, I can just shout out whatever I want.
The other thing is, too, is that not every comedian, you see it because, okay, you're watching clips of Trevor Wallace and Michael Blaustein, and you're watching Matt Rife, and that's the people you're watching. But then you go to a comedy show of a comedian who their work that they're doing is all written. They don't do crowd work. You're now interrupting somebody whose material has been written and is really good, and you've stopped
them. For them, like, you see the crowd work, but the only reason you see the crowd work is because if they put out a joke, they burnt it.
Yeah.
So, like, if they're working, they're touring, they're not posting their jokes because they burnt their joke.
Right.
But if they have an hour set on the road, 5 minutes of it is crowd work, and that's what you see.
Yeah.
But there's 55 minutes that they have to work through. Like, nobody wants somebody shouting from the crowd.
Yeah.
And that's how it is. But you mentioned how hard it is to recommend comedy to people. Yeah. Which it is, because you never know how someone's going to react. I mean, I know personally I like people that are darker, people that push the envelope.
Yep.
And not everybody is like that. Some people, like, there's totally clean comics out there. And there's some people that, you know, there's black comics that specifically say that they do more of comedy for black people. Because there's also people to relate to. Because also, if you listen to Theo Von and you're not Southern, you might not get everything that Theo Von says.
Yeah, 100%.
If you watch Cat Williams,
his comedy is more geared towards there's
a bunch of different factors that come into play, and so I want to know kind of like how have you evolved with comedy when it thinks of like what you used to watch growing up compared to what you watch later to what you watch now.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's hard to recommend to people, like you said, even just without knowing them, but also what I grew up watching is not what I watch today.
No, everything's constantly it's evolving and changing.
Growing up, Cat Williams. Cat was one, and I mean, when I was young, like middle school, high school, Cat Williams, he also had a chokehold on the fucking comedy industry. Cat was hilarious. I loved watching his stuff. Kevin Hart came out. His early specials are really funny. I loved Kevin when he first came out. In high school, I also watched a lot of Louis C.K. And I think that evolved for me,
That geared you more to what you like now. Louis
yes,
was that
Louis,
changing.
I think, is similar, not 100%, but I think it's similar to what Tom does.
Well, yeah, I think so. Tom was definitely out when Louis was still running,
Yeah.
but I didn't
Early, though, like
early.
later
But he was still
Louis,
getting
but
specials.
early
yeah,
Tom.
later Louis, but still,
Early Tom,
or they were both
yeah.
still doing specials.
Yes.
But I didn't pick up on Tom till Disgraceful, which I think is his third special.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious. I love that special. But that Disgraceful was around the time when Louis went away
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
reasons. For something. And to
Hang
me,
up the phone.
just hang up the phone. So to me, like Tom was that replacement for Louis that made
Yeah.
me feel like, oh, like this is what I needed. This is like because around that time I think is when I started to gear differently in comedy for what I like. So I think at the time I was listening to decent amount of like Bo Burnham, Chris D'Elia, John Mulaney, guys that were like more childish
Yeah.
and like had a lot of fun on stage. But I got more into the guys that were just more monotone, sarcastic, darker on stage. And so when Louis went away, the people that filled that void for me was like Tom and Anthony Jeselnik. Anthony Jeselnik, who's just all, he's jokes. There's no stories. He's all jokes,
Yeah.
punchline, 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 but they're dark.
Yeah.
He's very much the I want to twist a knife, like I want to
See, and I think
point you the different way.
the one thing I do still love, and this is just the type of comedy that I love because it's what Kat did, and I still like it's what Louis would do. Tom does it. Bert does it. Storytelling, and that's the other thing. Some people are really good at punchlines and hitting you with a joke or crowd work. Other people are real. Bert is phenomenal at telling a story. Joey Diaz could tell you the craziest story, and like it's the
One story could last you the whole hour. Like
he could do one story for an hour, and Joey has a way of taking the darkest, most depressing story that you're like, what the fuck?
Well,
but it's hilarious
and
as
you
the way
see,
he does.
I think Anthony Jeselnik's the opposite, where he'll find the darkest concept possible, and he turns it into joke, punchline, punchline.
Mhm.
Like his whole thing is, I'm just gonna keep hitting you with jokes, and I love comedians like that. So like Mark Norman, Jimmy Carr, Anthony Jeselnik
Yep.
are all guys that they're always looking for the joke.
Yeah.
So it's always just I'm moving fast through a bunch of different jokes and stories instead of just drawing out these long stories, peppering in the punchline, and then giving you the return at the end.
I think also I love, and you mentioned John Mulaney, and I actually liked his last special,
I love this.
and it's very different from his early ones. His first three, you have 3 specials before that. And I mean that's obviously if you watch it, he's sober now. And he even talks about it in the thing. He goes, "Yeah, I used to come out and I'd jump around like a crazy person. I wonder why that is." Now that he's clean or whatever, it's a lot more relaxed, it's chill, but his storytelling is still like he's on it. And I think the difference there is too, that's a guy who came from SNL, but as a writer.
Yeah, I mean,
And I think
so
that's also, I mean, you see it even.
But honestly, sometimes you see now that like a lot of guys you hear wrote for SNL, they come out pretty successful
Yeah.
compared to what the cast is doing nowadays. Like obviously back then, the people that came in with Will Ferrell and that came in with Adam Sandler and like those were like the two groups that were like holy
Yeah.
shit, like these were the stars of the
Yep.
stars. But when you think about now, like I hear a lot of guys be like, oh yeah, I was a writer on SNL, and they come out and they end up being uber fucking successful. So sometimes you think like nowadays it might be more beneficial to be a writer and just have that on your resume
Because
to
you
move
know
forward
what?
than to have your face plastered out there.
You know what it is too, is because like you said, you're working this material, you're writing. That's all you're doing on SNL, and somebody else is performing it, so you can see how does it land or what did they do, and you kind of get to then work it without working it.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point because especially I think writers, a lot of the writers are stand-ups.
Yeah.
Nowadays, not all the cast members are stand-ups. I mean, Pete does stand-up, but it's not his main focus. I don't
Keenan
think
doesn't.
nowadays. Keenan doesn't do stand-up. He
Started as an actor. He started as, you know what I mean?
He
Like
was
you said,
on,
young.
He was on Whiskey Ginger with Andrew Santino a couple weeks ago, and I remember he was on there and he was saying, he was like, dude, he's like, I don't do stand up. Like I did a little bit back in the day, and that's what helped me get on SNL. But like he's like, when I go and tour nowadays, I just go out and I tell stories and I do Q&As. Like I might have like 10 minutes of stand up, 20 minutes of stories and a 30-minute Q&A after. Like, when I tour, it's not a stand-up show. He's like, I don't really do any of that anymore. He's like, and if I could never do stand-up again, I wouldn't. He's like, if I could be on SNL or if I could just be an actor or a producer
movies and stuff,
or something like that, he's like, I'd be
he's
perfectly happy.
They're doing a new Good Burger.
Yeah, I did see that.
Which is, I'm sure it's going to be hilarious. It's just, the industry has changed a lot, and I think the podcasting has changed. Now, some of these people, I don't know how they would doing a full like tour and special like Theo Von or Bobby Lee. He's hilarious, right?
He's such an interesting case, Bobby, because he started out on Mad TV, which was a rival to SNL, shorter lived, which is also where Ari Spears came from,
who is
Ari
also
Spears
hilarious.
Mad TV.
I gotta put a pin in that one.
Well, I know we got a lot to talk about Ari Spears. We both love Ari Spears a lot. But so when you're talking, like, he came in red hot, and nowadays he refuses to do specials. He never wants to do them. He has
Bobby?
Yeah, Bobby doesn't do specials. You look around, Bobby doesn't have specials. He doesn't want to.
But he's everywhere.
He just likes to tour and do podcasts and do all that stuff, and he is hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, anytime he features on anything, like, seeing the Bad Friend show is probably one of the things that I want to do most, because him and Andrew together,
they were actually
hilarious.
filming an episode in Boston.
Yeah, no, they do. Yeah. They tour live now.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious. I think they're going on again soon, and they're coming to AC. I want to go see them so bad, because both of them are hilarious. They have an Bobby's, like, I think it's his niece, Rudy, is on there. She's hilarious. They have an up-and-comer, Jessie, Jetski, Juicy Johnson. They just give her a bunch of different names that make no fucking sense. But she's on there. She's a hilarious, like, up-and-coming comedian. Like, she was the doorman at the store. And now she's like, she quit after doing Bad Friends for so long, and now she's a touring comedian. Yeah. She is hilarious on their show. She has hilarious stand-up as well.
And I think, like, the podcasting is almost, if you're good at storytelling, like Joey or any of these other, like Bert and Tom.
You get Joey on a podcast, it's automatic gold.
It's automatic gold. You're going to have a hit episode. But also, I think it is a way for these people to get out there, especially through social media, and then get a special. Like we said, just trying to get through, like, SNL or through TV. Nobody's doing sitcoms anymore. You know? Like, the sitcoms that are on, you know, if there's really a ton of sitcoms on anymore, but the sitcoms that are on, they're not, it's the George Lopez show, it's the Jamie Foxx show.
No,
you're
not getting that. It's not Seinfeld. Personality. Yeah. They want a story now.
Correct.
Because before, you're paying these people to be them. Like, you wanted Seinfeld to be
Fresh Prince. You know what I mean? It's not that anymore. It's no longer that. I mean, I really feel like there's not a ton of sitcoms even on.
No, not really. I mean, if I really think about it, I'm sure you could pick some out that come out on streaming and whatnot. But, like, I mean, people love to revisit sitcoms. I can give you that. I mean, there is some. I think Blackish is still running.
I think Blackish might have ended, though. I think the spin-off, like Grownish and stuff, is on.
Yeah. I mean, you still have Modern Family, I believe, still goes. If not, it just recently ended. I don't know.
No, I think that's over too.
The Neighborhood with Cedric the Entertainer, that's still going.
Now, speaking of Cedric, and you mentioned Aries earlier, what I do find myself doing now, and it's almost like going back and revisiting your favorite movie. I will watch old specials. Oh, and especially because like Cat came out with the special. Was it last year or early this year?
I think, definitely. I think last year.
And what's really weird about it is it feels like more of the same from him, but I don't find it as funny. But if I go back and watch It's Pimpin' or
I feel like
Pimp Chronicles,
it comes out like you're talking out of time. And I know,
but when I'm watching the old ones, I know where it came from, and I'm like, hilarious.
So like it feels like it doesn't hit anymore because like it's not relatable anymore, and it feels like you're forcing to do that because, God, what are you, like 50, 60 years old, talking pimp? Like, come on. Yeah. And to me, like it's hard to do. Like I had that struggle. Chris Rock is one of the best. Yeah. No arguments. at all.
You
You
talk
can
about
never
the
say
newest
Chris
one?
Rock. Yeah, Chris Rock's one of the best to ever do. it.
Yeah.
And people, I'm sure there's a ton of people that love his special.
I thought it was good.
I personally didn't love it because it felt like he was talking out of time.
We actually did talk about this too. We talked about this particular special. I think what happened with that special is everybody knew at some point he's going to talk about the slap at the Oscars, and I think that's all everybody was watching it for, and that's all anybody was waiting for.
But I think that's a double-edged sword where I think it hurt because, again, double-edged sword. So it hurt him because people are waiting to hear this. Nothing else is really important until
Correct.
you talk about it. But also, most people watched it because of it.
Because of it, yeah.
So, like, it hurts you to the point where I was like, okay, get to the slap. But it also helped you
But
because
he had all
now
this
you
other
did
material,
now
yeah.
you did numbers
Yeah.
because of the slap. So, like,
Yeah.
to me, it's 50-50 in the point that, like, okay, like, yeah, your material didn't seem as important because they're waiting on the slap material,
Right.
but they also tuned in because of the slap material.
Yeah.
So it's a 50-50 thing where, like, did it hurt you or help you? I don't know. Because I remember you went right after the slap happened, he was touring, he was going to Boston. And
Yeah.
you wanted to get tickets to his show. And before the slap, you checked, and his tickets were
cheap.
And then it was sold out.
Skyrocketed.
And then they were like
Yeah,
$500 for the
It's
balcony.
crazy.
Like,
But he even said, and on that tour, he was like, I'm not talking about the slap. I have material that was already, and that's the other, like we talked about, I have material that was already written. I already have my set down, and this is what I'm doing. And I also need to process what just happened. I'm not talking about it yet. The conversation will come, but it's not right now.
which is a professional way to handle
Exactly,
that.
100%.
Which, there's a certain amount of professionalism in stand-up.
Which
that I
is-
don't think
which is
gets
respectable.
credit.
It's respectable because he could have 100% thrown away
Oh.
half of the material he had and said, "Oh yeah, this tour is now about
But
this,"
then-
and it
but-
still would have sold.
But then you're almost selling garbage. You're not testing material.
No,
you're putting it
absolutely.
out right away.
Absolutely.
You're most likely just gonna be taking cheap shots at Will Smith. Like it's nothing that's clever or funny.
Yeah.
It takes the art out of the stand-up. I mean, and like at that point, it was also getting beaten to death. Every stand-up came out and talked about it and did the joke on it. So then, like, what are you gonna say that nobody's heard at that time? You come out with it a year later,
Was
everybody forgets those.
Was
jokes.
it Damon or one of the Wayans brothers? They had a special and they talked about it. Before,
Yeah.
Before Chris even did.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones I think was Andrew Schultz, who is another one that he's fucking huge now.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to or if you hear comedians talk about like, oh, like who are the people like have their shit together, and you talk to them about like, oh, what should I do and all that stuff. Andrew Schultz is one of them. To
Yeah.
where like everybody sees him as like basically the godfather when it comes to New York comedy because he just has his shit together and he works everything so well. And he had a great skit on his Flagrant 2 podcast where he was talking about the slap when it first happened. And it is hilarious. I mean, I think between him, Tom, and Joe Rogan seem to be kind of almost godfathers of the current age to where people like ask for their advice because they have their head on. So
And I think that's the other thing. Joe Rogan has helped, and he did, like people forget, but Rogan did stand up.
oh,
and-
yeah. It's
but-
because he has his hand in so much shit
But
now.
now,
like,
Rogan was the first big podcaster. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah.
And people forget. And what helped bring it forward even more was the pandemic. But Rogan had been doing this, and his stand-up experience helped him. He also was friends with everybody. So,
but he's put everybody on.
no,
Like,
100%.
when it comes to the newer guys that are starting the podcast and doing all the things,
yeah,
like Joe put on Shane Gillis, Joe put on Tom Segura, Joe put
Yep.
on Burt Kreischer, Joe put on. I mean, like Joey Diaz was already big, but he's even bigger because he keeps
he's
doing
on.
his
Yeah,
podcasts.
he keeps doing his podcast.
So,
yeah.
like,
And I absolutely love, and it cracks me up. I don't know why he does it, but every time Joey's on and he talks to Joe, he calls him by his full name, and it's the funniest thing to me. Listen
here, Joe Rogan.
Listen to Joe Rogan. And it's the funniest thing because it's like, why? Why? Full name every single time. No, Joe Rogan. No. That's your new shirt, Joe Rogan. That's your new shirt. But you're right. I mean, even Joe, he doesn't tour anymore. But he's hilarious. There's
He doesn't need to. I mean, he's dipped in with the UFC. He's doing all his own Joe Rogan podcast stuff. I mean, he recently, like a little while ago, came out with an AI version of his own podcast. Seriously, like it's like the AI Joe Rogan experience. If you look it up on whatever like podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, There's like an AI version of his podcast where he has guests,
Yeah.
where it's AI versions of him and like Drake talking to each other.
So weird.
It's hilarious.
So weird.
And only Joe Rogan would do that.
That's so
Like
weird.
nobody else would do that.
Comedy Central, back in the day, or not back in the day, a few years ago, and I don't know if it's still happening, they had a thing called This Is Not Happening. And it was a stand-up club, and established comedians would come up and they would tell a story. They'd have like a 15-minute set, and they would basically just tell one story. And Joey's stories on there are hilarious. He did it. Ralphie May has done it. And rest in peace, Ralphie May was hilarious. But I find myself just watching these old clips or old specials that I know are funny and that I grew up with and re-laughing at stuff. Like, I can rewatch Tom's, John Mulaney's, but also, like, I think I also am drawn to comedians that are no longer around, so we're not getting any new material. So, like, Bernie Mac, I'm going to go back and watch Bernie's stuff, and I'm going to crack up. I'll watch...
I'll tell you what I always rewatch is, I don't remember the name of it, but when Ari Spears was doing the round, and he had like Shaq and Barkley.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what an iconic special for a guy that I think doesn't get credit. Because when you're talking about guys, especially back in the day on the black comedy scene, like that get a lot of credit. I mean, talking Cat, you're talking Bernie, you're talking Cedric, like all the kings of comedy. You're talking about the Wayans brothers, like you're talking about all these guys. I feel like Aries doesn't get enough love in that conversation, and I think he is the one that makes me laugh the most. I mean, his impressions are fucking.
I think amongst comedians within that, circle of people, for comedians, they are talking Aries. They know and they respect him and they know what he's done. But yeah, as far as other people, I don't think he reached as wide of an audience.
No.
Another comedian that very family friendly, but I think is hilarious, especially his older stuff because his impressions, Fluffy.
Oh yeah, I mean Fluffy's killing it. I mean he came out with a special earlier this year. I think earlier this year he did Dodger Stadium.
Yeah,
he shot a special in Dodger Stadium,
and he's still killing it. Like his
fucking.
And I think it's because his stuff is still family friendly. Like it's good material. Like it's funny all the time and it's lighthearted, which again I do like. Aside from like the darker, and storytelling, like Fluffy's, sometimes it's nice to have that break of like, oh yeah, this is funny and it's lighthearted and it's very. I'm not laughing at that.
So no, you could like put it on with your family. You like.
I'm not watching Shane Gillis with the family. No, which is hilarious. But I'm not. Not everybody's gonna laugh. I already know. I'm gonna be cracking up on the couch and I'm gonna look around the room and people are like,
"No, I was
talking about Nazis."
Well, and I think it's an interesting point that like we got I think sidetracked off earlier when we talked about recommending comedy. And like, so there's newer faces that I mentioned at the start of this podcast that are getting pretty big. And they all kind of run in different lanes. And I think it shows as to what lane you're supposed to stay in because as of recent, with Matt Rife's special coming out, he's getting a bunch of controversy because of the jokes he tells compared to his audience. Mm-hmm. While Shane Gillis came out with a podcast before him. And so if you watch Matt Rife, there's a bunch of people that are coming out saying things about Matt Rife's special. Some people just think it's not funny. They think that he's a fraud or a has-been or thinks that just, he got big because he's good looking.
Which I think is partially true.
Well, I think it's partially true as to why he's blown up. I think he genuinely is funny. I think he genuinely is a very funny guy. And because I remember him back when he was on MTV, back on Wild 'N Out. So like he was funny back then. I've seen him on podcasts. I've seen all of his clips. And he had jokes, I think, in the special that landed, but it wasn't as consistent as we'd hoped for. But I think he has growing pains.
Yeah.
Like, I think you've never seen somebody since Dave Chappelle get so big so fast when it comes to stand-up comedy. Like, within a year, he goes from can't sell a club to he could sell out a stadium. Yeah. Like, that is a hard transition. And he seems like he's handled it pretty well. But the reason that he struggled, like, it's a struggle. It's the only time that you can say it's a struggle to be good looking is as a comedian. Because people want to laugh at you and people want to relate to you. Mm-hmm. No one relates to the good looking guy. Like, you can't go on stage and say, like, oh, I get so many girls, because then it's already not funny. same thing. Like a lot of female comedians have to adjust to that as well because they go on stage and they're going to be sexualized.
Yeah.
So they have to sexualize themselves in the opposite way and be like, "Oh, I'm so gross," and they like have to cover up so that people pay attention to their joke and feel related to them.
And Matt Rife has talked about it too, where he's like, "This didn't happen. This wasn't the beginning of my career." And you can see if you go back to his early stuff, he wasn't this as good looking as he is now, and now he is. And he's like, "But this doesn't work. This isn't helping me," because he's the audience he's pulling in because of that. And so, again, that's why you test your material, right? Like I said with Bill Burr, he comes out and he does a set.
But when you blow up that big in a year, how much time do you have to test your material?
No, absolutely. But he's also pulling it. There's some things he can't control.
Yeah.
He's people are buying tickets online for people that are like, he's good looking, I want to go see him. And then they're like, these jokes aren't funny. Well, they're not for you. They weren't for you.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard him say it a couple times. He was like, usually I'll have a show and all the girls are smiling in the beginning and their boyfriends look pissed when they get there. And then the boyfriends are smiling at the end and the girls look pissed when they leave.
And it reminds me of...
Which I think it's part of why he's getting the controversy. Yeah. Because who's watching his special?
Yeah.
He made one joke, which is what is getting the controversy for. The gist of the joke was that a woman was his waitress. She had a black eye. And then, so he makes a domestic violence joke of saying like, oh, well, like, he said they should have put her in the kitchen, because that's the face of your company. Like, the hostess has a black eye, whatever. And then he says,
she wouldn't have, she's in the kitchen. She would have been in the kitchen.
Yeah. So that's the basis of the joke. And like, it's pretty, like, it's not an uncommon
I have heard worse. I have heard worse.
And that's so he's getting a lot of controversy for it. But that's because everybody that watched his special are more casual comedy fans and that are women.
Yeah.
So, but when Shane Gillis comes out with a special, it's all a bunch of just
even
more meathead guys that like, because he pushed the envelope the entire time.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
He talks about, mental illness. He talks about of gay people. He talks about women. He talks about everything that you shouldn't be talking about. And he got zero backlash. He got praise saying that like
the guy
he's
who almost made it on SNL.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's funny too because even that Comedy Central, This Is Not Happening. Joey Diaz has a story where he talks about when he was in school and Sister Hyacinth, the nun, because he went to Catholic school, and he beat up a nun one day. And he tells the story. It's a 15-minute story of him talking about how he beat up a nun. Hilarious. There's no backlash. You know what I mean? Nobody's talking like, oh, why would he say that? Why would he do that? It's like, it's just telling the story, And what part of it is true? You know what I mean? I mean, it's Joey Diaz. I'm sure all of it is true. But
it's just the point that like, if your audience knows what to expect from you, you don't get in trouble. Shane's audience knows what to expect from him. He doesn't get in trouble. Matt's doesn't. He gets in trouble. And so I also think it's a point to where like, he's gonna adjust. He's not dead in the water. He's gonna adapt. But it also, I think, more his audience will change. Because he seems like he has no regret about anything that he did, because he came out on Instagram the next day and he posted, like, it was just a picture of him doing comedy, and he wrote a caption. He's like, hey, if you had a problem with anything I said, here's a link to my official apology.
And
it was a picture of helmets for special needs people. Which is terrible, and people hated him more after he did it. I personally thought it was funny, and I think people that thought it was funny are going to gravitate more towards him. So I don't think he's going to clean up his act to gear towards different people. I think just the right audience is sooner going to find him.
Well, and I think the other thing is too, and it reminds me, in him taking the controversy in stride and not shutting down and still having the laugh. It reminds me of, do you remember the incident with Bill Burr in the early 2000s, like 2006? Who was doing a show. The crowd had heckled the person prior, booing everything. Bill Burr comes out, and Bill Burr is Bill Burr. And I fucking love him for it. And he comes out and he starts, fuck you, attacking the crowd because they heckled the last person. They're booing him, and he doesn't give a fuck. He goes on for, 15 minutes, I think. 15, 20 minutes. Does his whole fucking set. They were booing, they heckled the last person, booed him at the beginning, him coming out and basically berating the crowd. Standing ovation, and they cheered him at the end of his set.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he ripped like 15 minutes of just tearing down the crowd and the city that he was in.
Yep, Philly, which was in Philly.
Yeah, it was in Philly. Which is not an easy crowd to work for.
No, and he tears them apart. And tearing them apart, and at the end, standing ovation, which is hard. Because even though you tore down the crowd and you tore them apart, and they still cheered for you, but there's a level of commitment there. A level of professionalism and like just knowing what you're doing.
So like there's a point to comedy where you always have to like kind of stick to your guns, because if you abandon the bit's
halfway
not
through,
it's no longer just not funny,
and the crowd's gonna turn on you.
You look like a bitch.
Yeah,
like the crowd turns on you. It wasn't funny. Like your whole set gets fucked up, and you also have to do that in your career. Like if you do something, unless it's like really bad, really out of pocket, that you actually regret it, you have to just stick to your guns.
And you know what? It's funny because
the more you do that, the more you get away with it.
There's really nothing like comedy in that sense of if you lose the crowd, you're done. You're done. If you can't keep the crowd, if they turn on you, it's very hard to get them back or turn them back.
If you start to lose them, you have to double down. Like you can't just be like, "Oh no, I don't. I'm sorry." Like as soon as you say that, like you're finished.
Well, so and I love the comedians that are like, "This joke. Oh, y'all didn't think that was funny. Oh, all right then, whatever." Like, or this joke.
Sometimes acknowledging
he goes, "This joke isn't gonna land well," and then he does it, and everybody starts laughing. He goes, "Oh, I guess I'll keep it then."
Yeah, he says in it that I wasn't gonna do it. I'm gonna anyway. He's like, just know if you see this on the special, I want an argument.
But you know what? And the other thing is too is like even you go back to Bernie. Like look at when Bernie Mac was on. Why am I drawing a blank on the what's the comedy show that they used to have back in the day? It's gonna kill me because Bernie when he came out though his line was, "I'm not scared of you, motherfucker." He didn't care. Like, fuck you, motherfucker. If you didn't laugh, it was, I don't give a fuck. I wrote it. I think it's funny. Fuck you. And, like, he just kept going. Or the second, like, people didn't laugh at something, he's like, you know what the fuck I'm talking about. Like, he just, like, was, like, on them. Which kind of for, like, all right, that shit is kind of funny. Like, because there are some jokes that people are like, I don't know if I should laugh at that.
Yeah,
you know?
You look to your left and your right before you do so.
Should I be laughing at that? Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also,
Def Comedy Jam. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
But there's an art to it as well when it comes down to it, because saying something controversial or fucked up doesn't automatically make you funny. And it doesn't automatically make it okay, because there's also a misconception. I heard Theo Vaughn and Anthony Jeselnik talking about this on This Past Weekend, which is Theo's podcast, a while ago. And when he came on, he was like, pushing the envelope and just saying, fuck you if you don't like it.
For the sake of...
doesn't make you good. It doesn't make you a good comedian. He's saying, Jeselnik quoted somebody else, but so I'm quoting Jeselnik, quoting somebody else. I don't remember who he was quoting. But he said, comedy is getting away with it. So if you have to double down and say like, oh, if you don't like it, fuck you, then you didn't do your job right.
Yeah.
And when you get them to laugh when they're not supposed to and they don't make us think about it, that's when you did your job right.
Absolutely.
So like, which I think is genius, and you never really think about it. Yeah, I guess that is right. When you don't get the blowback when you did the fucked up thing, it's really like, oh, like you got away with it. That was the thrill. That was the thrill of telling the joke.
You're absolutely right, and I think like leaving on the note of like, and this is not just in comedy, but it's especially prevalent. I think in this conversation people can get is in the industry of entertainment. When it comes to comedy, acting, music, there's a lot of fucking work that these people are putting in to what we're seeing and what we're watching that is behind the scenes work. It's stuff you don't see. You know, that's why like you get when they do the special, you get like the behind the stage, you get some of that stuff of like even early Cat specials, you know, you're following him around as they're like going, and he's touring with his friends, and you see like them performing, and then you see Cat's big special at the end, like for the hour block. And it's like, there's a lot of work that goes into this. You have to respect, look what we talked about with Tom and Bert and how much they're doing. It's full time. Oh. And it's not easy. I'll tell you what, I went through acting school. I did improv and I did sketch comedy, and I'll tell you what, writing a full set, writing 15 minutes and doing 15 minutes is so much. It's so hard and it's so nerve-wracking.
Do you know Kill Tony, the podcast out of Austin.
I don't
Where,
think so.
okay, so the concept of Kill Tony is that it's a panel. You might, when I describe it to you, you might be like, oh yeah, I've seen the clips or whatever. It's a panel of comedians and like stars and whatnot. And they go there and like they'll joke around, they fuck with the crowd, like it's a whole live podcast with an audience.
Mhm.
And like every once in a while, they bring out an amateur, and they do 60 seconds.
I have seen this.
Yeah. So
Is that the one? The guy? I like
Yeah,
rocks.
I like rocks.
I like rocks. Yeah, I've seen it.
But I like rocks.
I like rocks.
Fucking.
I got
so-
this one right here. Like, hilarious.
Yeah. So that's the whole concept of the show, and I've seen people go up there, and like these are people that have been doing comedy for a little bit. Like they're not like completely inexperienced, but they're like newer guys. And he goes up there and he starts bombing. And he's like, "Damn, 60 seconds is a long time because all you get is 60 seconds on Kill Tony. You only get 60 seconds.
It's a
60 seconds is a long time. 5 minutes is like your standard new guy set. That's a longer time. 15 minutes is hard to build to. 30 is the best, and an hour is the top
special?
guys in the game.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
1% of the 1% of comics do an hour.
Yeah.
That's the
It's
insanity of it.
it's hard, and that's even look, they do award shows. There's a reason they even getting a stand-up comedian is like they got to write all that material. And that's a lot of prep work.
Yeah.
Like Ricky Gervais, Ricky Gervais is hilarious. I absolutely love his comedy. Not somebody who I would recommend to everybody. I can't. His level of comedy is not for everybody. He's going to offend the most amount of people in his block.
Well, as you brought up award shows, one of the things that we can say before we get out of here, the Golden Globes is going to be adding a stand-up comedy,
Yeah.
the best stand-up comedy special as one of the categories, which I think is genius. I don't know how it hasn't been done before. Comedy, stand-up comedy in particular, is so big now. How could
Yep.
you avoid doing it?
Well, they've always done it they do it at the which weird because they'll do it at the Emmys. They as the album.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
album.
they do the album, which
But,
is
like-
which is the special, but it's
albums are dead.
I
Like
know.
albums
No,
were
I
like
know.
a thing that was big in the 90s and the 2000s
Yeah.
because like not everybody was getting Comedy Central specials because you're only getting on Comedy Central or Def Comedy Jam or
Yeah.
something of the sort. But then then what do you put out? You
Yeah.
get a special every couple of years and it's only the top of the top guys. So like you put out the album so that people can listen to them because it's a lot easier to produce. It's a lot easier for you to do. Albums are dead now.
Yeah.
Because there's so much accessibility.
and I
But
think
now there's like going to be doing for the best stand-up special, which I think is great. There's so many specials coming out. Like, I mean, Bert, Tom, John Mulaney, Shane Gillis, Matt Rife. Like, you have all these guys that came out with specials. I mean, there's probably a list of guys that I could even name that I'm just not thinking of right now. But like, there is so much stand-up coming out. Why wouldn't you have this? And I think it's going to be monumental to see who's going to get like the first ever Golden Globe stand-up comedy award. Like that's a monumentous day for stand-up comedy that you guys are getting an award. For stand-up.
and you're competing against other comedians.
And then I think it's only time until everybody else kind of steps in and like all the other award shows start doing it too.
Yeah. I think it is good, and it's a great way to appreciate that branch of the industry and the amount of work that goes into it. And it's a lot. There's so much prep, and then you got to hope it lands. You're hoping it sticks once you finally do the special and you did all that work. Which, look, Matt Rife, we know that as of right now, the audience not sticking with the audience, but you got to respect the amount of work that he put in and what he did.
What I will say is that it looks like for him specifically, it's hard to go through that much change in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
It looks like he's handling it remarkably well. And even if he's not being received well from the special or his audience isn't going to be the same audience, I think he's going to bounce back.
Yeah.
He's going through everything pretty good, pretty professionally, and he's handled everything well that I don't think everybody could have. So I think he'll bounce back. Like he's not dead. Like he'll still be doing theaters at least.
I think what I would love to see done is almost like a panel type of thing where like every episode, or even remember the comedians in cars getting coffee? Like Seinfeld was doing that. Like I would love to see another show like Netflix. I could see Netflix doing it because they're so big into comedy right now. Of like, all right, you know what? Every episode is like, an hour, let's say, and it's 15-minute blocks of Tom's here. He's gonna do a 15-minute, and Joey or like even older actors, like get Cedric on there for 15 minutes. He's gonna kill it. He's gonna kill a 15-minute fucking set.
Is another cool one, because then this is also almost like a podcast. But have you seen the show Barbershop? It's run by LeBron James.
Yeah.
It's on HBO, I think, currently.
Yep.
Like something like that with comedians. So it's almost like a
and
podcast,
you kind of rotate,
but there's like
the panel.
6 or 7 of them, and you just keep rotating more people in and out, so you get those Q&As. Like one, that's not like doing the sports guys, because that's a lot of sports guys and actors and stuff like that. That's just hilarious.
Yeah,
like
no,
the amount of entertainment value you would get out of having like different comedians from different backgrounds and different.
And I mean,
ages
I've seen Rogan with, a couple of people. You know what I mean? But like, no, like
But
let's
if
get
you put on a
six,
panel of
like
like
six
6 of them,
people.
and you just have them
Just
have a
talking.
conversation and have maybe one guy mediate. Like you have a steady guy that's on there that can help mediate a conversation.
You know what?
And move it forward.
Variety does that during the award season. They do. They have like the panel of the actors that are nominated for in the major categories, or directors that are nominated for like Best Picture, and they'll have them all talk. And then there's one person that's kind of meeting, asking questions of like like just, and some of it's like specific to like their movie, and some of it's specific to like that year of movies, and others it's just like your experience in the industry. You've been doing this for 20 years. What have you learned? And then especially because then on that panel, like it's Best Picture, so you have like you'll have somebody like Tarantino, but then you'll have like a newer director who's like they came out with a fucking crazy movie, and now you have all like it's
But
a wide range.
All that is like interesting.
Yeah,
but when you bring in all stand-up comedians,
no, but that's what
you're
I
getting
mean.
interesting and funny. Like you're getting the podcast with the guy mediating to still get the insight.
Yeah,
play all that inside baseball with you.
Yep.
So like to me, that's some of my favorite parts of listening to comedy podcasts.
I could see Rogan hosting something
baseball.
like that,
oh my God.
and then having a panel of like older but also new, like, and at that point too, because it's a panel and stuff, you can pull. It doesn't have to strictly be stand-up comedians. You can pull Bobby Lee. You can pull Theo Vaughn. You can pull these other guys who are real good on podcasts, as well as comedic actors. What's stopping Seth Rogen doesn't do stand-up, but he's hilarious. There's nothing stopping you from pulling in Rogan or Will Ferrell or Adam Sandler, these guys who aren't really doing shows anymore, but are hilarious. There's a lot that they can also talk about and bring in and add to the conversation. That's going to be, like Adam Sandler's been doing this a long time. I would love to hear his stories. Oh, and especially him then talking and comparing like with the newer guys who are like, oh no, it was totally different back in the day.
Especially guys like David Spade and Kevin James can play a lot of inside baseball with both, because they both have done the stand-up while also doing a lot of movies and stuff and movie work. Like they're both really knowledgeable when it comes to stand-up comedy.
Another comedian that I absolutely love, and I should have mentioned him earlier because I have seen him, is Joe Coy.
Oh, Joe Coy is hilarious.
He's hilarious.
Another one, he's almost like Fluffy, where he's like in the you can watch him with the family.
You can kind of watch him with the
family.
family.
I think he's a little dirtier than Fluffy, but he's still like family friendly, cool comic, and he's one of the, again, like there's only a certain amount of comics that like don't just play like a stadium. Like they play like they do like Madison Square Garden. Like they do like they'll do football stadiums consistently. Fluffy was one.
Yep.
Kevin Hart, Joe Coy. Like even if you're not big fans of them, they have audiences that are massive.
And he's hilarious.
Like,
I've seen him.
And like I think Bert's on the way and Tom might be on the way. And there might be other guys, but like there's 3 guys that I think are solidified, can run a stadium at any point, and they will sell out every single one. And it's Fluffy, Kevin Hart, Joe Coy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's probably your list right now. Yeah, I'd say those are your biggest ones. And that's the other thing too. You can name a bunch of big artists, or like big comedians. It is very hard to sell out a football stadium. I don't think people realize like how big football stadiums are. It is so many people. Even for musicians, you can name big musicians. You're not selling out like a football stadium. It's very, very difficult. There are a lot of seats, and you're not going to just perform there to sell half of the seats. That's the point.
To be a comedian to do it is it's a more niche market. Like everybody goes around listening to music, and like 90% of the country watches some sort of sport to like watch a sport in a stadium, but for a stand-up comedian to do it is just otherworldly. Like it's next level, especially if you're doing a stadium tour. Like you're not doing a stadium. They're
Yeah.
doing stadiums across. So it's not like people are traveling to see you because you're going for like, oh, I did Dallas, and then I did Philly, and then I did New York, and I did Chicago. So I'm not getting Chicago people coming to my New York show because I'm doing Chicago. Like, so like it's a whole different. Like you are top of the line type of comedian, and like it's a level that you cannot reach unless you are like the 1% of the 1%.
Yeah. I think we need to pitch this this panel idea
I
to
know,
like
I-
Netflix. It's
So if anybody listening has any connections, you know, throw our name out there, show them some clips. Maybe we can get into a room and pitch some ideas. We can be more successful, give you guys more content.
Yeah. And
I would
we can also
love
get a
to be
ton
the
of
mediator. I'd do that.
funny content that we could just pull out of some of these people, and just the stories you would get alone of like these people live crazy lives. They like touring and like it's wild.
Like, just imagine a room. You just get like John Mulaney and Joey Diaz, and then you get like Michael Blaustein, and then you'll go. Let's see. Let me get Aries Spears.
Yeah.
Let me get Fluffy, and you put all these guys that are all so different, and you put them in a room, different generations, different types of comedy, and like
I put
something
Cedric on there. He's an older Kings of Comedy. Yeah, and I mean we saw Cedric. We met Cedric when he and like
he did
his storytelling is still
yeah.
And then
That was
did
amazing.
a panel Q&A, and he's still on it. He hasn't lost it. He's still like,
Oh yeah, he's quick.
He's got
the
it,
wit still. Like, you don't lose that.
yep. So, and he's been in this long enough. He's got stories that like, he's got stories that some of these new guys like Matt Rife, he's not gonna have, you know. But that's just because Cedric is seasoned and he's been doing this a long time. Steve Harvey has been doing this for so long.
Steve Harvey's the one that you forget about because he's the host of hosts. Like, there's there's nobody better at hosting something than
Steve Harvey.
So you kind of forget he was a comedian.
He was a comedian,
Like, that
a
was
very
his-
successful and a very funny comedian.
But I don't even know how long we've been running for at this point. Might be time to end this conversation. If you guys love the stand-up content, let us know. We'd be happy to do it. I mean, most of what I do is absorb stand-up throughout the day and stand-up comedians content. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Beer and Skittles. Let us know if you love this. Let us know your thoughts on who your favorite stand-ups and all that. And hopefully we'll see you next week.
Yeah, catch you on the next one.